This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Christine Blashford, www.wokeupthismorning.co.uk. The Price of Love by Arnold Bennett. Chapter 3. The Feast. Part 1. The dramatic moment of the birthday feast came nearly at the end of the meal, when Mrs. Maldon, having in mysterious silence disappeared for a space to the room behind, returned with due pomp, bearing a parcel in her dignified hands. During her brief absence, Louis, Rachel, and Julian, hero of the night, had sat mute and somewhat constrained round the debris of the birthday pudding. The constraint was no doubt due partly to Julian's characteristic and notorious grim temper, and partly to mere anticipation of a solemn event. Julian Maldon in particular was self-conscious. He hated intensely to be self-conscious, and his feelings towards every witness of his self-consciousness partook always of the homicidal. Were it not that civilization has the means to protect itself, Julian might have murdered defenceless aged ladies and innocent young girls for the simple offence of having seen him blush. He was a perfect specimen of a throwback to original ancestry. He had been born in London, of an American mother, and had spent the greater part of his life in London. Yet London and his mother seemed to count for absolutely nothing at all in his composition. At the age of 17 his soul, quitting the exile of London, had come to the Five Towns with a sigh of relief, as if at the assuagement of a long nostalgia, and had dropped into the district as into a socket. In 3 months he was more indigenous than a native. Any experienced observer who now chanced at a week-end to see him board the Manchester express at Euston would have been able to predict from his appearance that he would leave the train at Knype. He was an undersized man with a combative and suspicious face. He regarded the world with crafty pugnacity from beneath frowning eyebrows. His expression said, "Woe betide the being who tries to get the better of me." His expression said, "Keep off." His expression said, "I am that I am, take me or leave me, but preferably leave me. I loathe fuss, pretence, flourishes, and any and every form of damned nonsense." He had an excellent heart, but his attitude towards it was the attitude of his great-grandmother towards her front parlour. He used it as little as possible, and kept it locked up like a shame. In brief, he was more than a bit of a bore. And boorishness being his chief fault, he was quite naturally proud of it, counted it for the finest of all qualities, and scorned every manifestation of its opposite. To prove his inward sincerity, he deemed it right to flout any form of external grace, such as politeness, neatness, elegance, compliments, small talk, smooth words, and all ceremonial whatever. He would have died in torment sooner than kiss. He was averse even from shaking hands, and when he did shake hands he produced a carpenter's vice, crushed flesh and bone together, and flung the intruding pulp away. His hat was so heavy on his head that only by an exhausting and supreme effort could he raise it to a woman, and after the odious accident he would feel as humiliated as a fox-terrier after a bath. By the kind hazard of fate he had never once encountered his great-aunt in the street. He was superb in enmity, a true hero. He would quarrel with a fellow and say curtly, "I'll never speak to you again," and he never would speak to that fellow again. Were the last trump to blow and all the British Isles to be submerged save the summit of Snowdon, and he and that fellow to find themselves alone and safe together on the peak, he could still be relied upon never to speak to that fellow again. Thus would he prove that he was a man of his word, and that there was no nonsense about him. Strange though it may appear to the thoughtless, he was not disliked, much less ostracised. Codes differ. He conformed to one which suited the instincts of some 30,000 other adult males in the Five Towns. 2 strapping girls in the warehouse of his manufactory at Knype quarrelled over him in secret as the Prince Charming of those parts. Yet he had never addressed them except to inform them that if they didn't mind their P's and Q's he would have them flung off the bank manufactory. Rachel herself had not yet begun to be prejudiced against him. This monster of irascible cruelty regarded himself as a middle-aged person, but he was only 25 that day, and he did not look more either, despite a stiff, strong moustache. He too, like Louis and Rachel, had the gestures of youth, the unconsidered lithe movements of limb, the wistful unteachable pride of his age, the touching self-confidence. Old Mrs. Maldon was indeed old among them. Part 2. She sat down in all her benevolent stateliness, and with a slightly irritating deliberation undid the parcel, displaying a flattish leather case about 7 inches by 4, which she handed formally to Julian Maldon, saying as she did so, "From your old auntie, my dear boy, with her loving wishes. You have now lived just a quarter of a century." And as Julian, awkwardly grinning, fumbled with the spring catch of the case, she was aware of having accomplished a great and noble act of surrender. She hoped the best from it. In particular, she hoped that she had saved the honour of her party, and put it at last on a secure footing of urbane convivial success. For that a party of hers should fail in giving pleasure to every member of it was a menace to her legitimate pride. And so far fate had not been propitious. The money in the house had been, and was, on her mind. Then the lateness of the guests had disturbed her, and then Julian had aggrieved her by a piece of obstinacy very like himself. Arriving straight from a train journey, he had wanted to wash, but he would not go to the specially prepared bedroom where a perfect apparatus awaited him. No, he must needs take off his jacket in the back room, and roll up his sleeves, and stamp into the scullery, and there splash and rub like a stableman, and wipe himself on the common rough roller towel. He said he preferred the sink. Offensive word! He would not even say slopstone, which was the proper word. He said sink, and again sink. And then, when the meal finally did begin, Mrs. Maldon's serviette and silver serviette ring had vanished. Impossible to find them. Mr. Batchgrew had of course horribly disarranged the table, and in the upset the serviette and ring might have fallen unnoticed into the darkness beneath the table, but no search could discover them. Had the serviette and ring ever been on the table at all? Had Rachel perchance forgotten them? Rachel was certain that she had put them on the table. She remembered casting away a soiled serviette and replacing it with a clean one, in accordance with Mrs. Maldon's command for the high occasion. She produced the soiled serviette in proof. Moreover, the ring was not in the serviette drawer of the sideboard. Renewed search was equally sterile. At one moment Mrs. Maldon thought that she herself had seen the serviette and ring on the table early in the evening, but at the next she thought she had not. Conceivably, Mr. Batchgrew had taken them in mistake. Yes, assuredly, he had taken them in mistake, somehow. And yet it was inconceivable that he had taken a serviette and ring in mistake. In mistake for what? No. Mystery, excessively disconcerting for an old lady. In the end, Rachel provided another clean serviette, and the meal commenced. But Mrs. Maldon had not been able to settle down in an instant. The wise, pitying creatures in their 20s considered that it was absurd for her to worry herself about such a trifle. But was it a trifle? It was rather a denial of natural laws, a sinister miracle. Serviette rings cannot walk, nor fly, nor be annihilated. And further, she had used that serviette ring for more than 20 years. However, the hostess in her soon triumphed over the foolish old lady, and taken the head of the board with aplomb. And indeed aplomb had been required, for the guests behaved strangely, unless it was that the hostess was in a nervous mood for fancying trouble. Julian Maldon was fidgety and preoccupied, and Louis himself, usually a model guest, was also fidgety and preoccupied. As for Rachel, the poor girl had only too obviously lost her head about Louis. Mrs. Maldon had never seen anything like it. Never! Part 3. Julian, having opened the case, disclosed twin briar pipes, silver-mounted, with alternative stems of various lengths, and diverse mouthpieces, all reposing on soft couches of fawn-tinted stuff, with a crimson silk-lined lid to serve them for canopy. A rich and costly array. Everybody was impressed, even startled, for not merely was the gift extremely handsome, it was more than a gift. It symbolized the end of an epoch in those lives. Mrs. Maldon had been no friend of tobacco. She had lukewarmly permitted cigarettes, which Louis smoked, smoking naught else. But cigars she had discouraged, and pipes she simply would not have. Now Julian smoked nothing but a pipe. Hence in his great-aunt's parlour he had not smoked. In effect, he had been forbidden to smoke there. The theory that a pipe was vulgar had been stiffly maintained in that sacred parlour. In the light of these facts, did not Mrs. Maldon's gift indeed shine as a great and noble act of surrender? Was it not more than a gift, and entitled to stagger beholders? Was it not a sublime proof that the earth revolves and the world moves? Mrs. Maldon was as susceptible as anyone to the drama of the moment, perhaps more than anyone. She thrilled and became happy as Julian in silence minutely examined the pipes. She had taken expert advice before purchasing, and she was tranquil as to the ability of the pipes to withstand criticism. They bore the magic triple initials of the first firm of briar pipe makers in the world, initials as famous and as welcome on the plains of Hindustan as in the home counties or the frozen zone. She gazed round the table with increasing satisfaction. Louis, who was awkwardly fixed with regard to the light, the shadow of his bust falling always across his plate, had borne that real annoyance with the most charming good humour. He was a delight to the eye. He had excellent qualities, especially social qualities. Rachel sat opposite to the hostess.